The gratitude tithe is due. Fleet Commander Eva Rostova stood on the observation deck of the starship Arbitrage. Below the planet, Kalin drifted a swirl of serene blue and white. It looked peaceful from orbit, a deceptive calm masking the crisis unfolding on its surface. The Ethelin Tithe fleet, a predatory conclave of legalists and resource hunters, had blockaded the system. Their demand was simple, delivered through channels dripping with condescending formality, a gratitude tax for their unsolicited arrival and protection. Rostova's jaw tightened. This was extortion cloaked in the finery of galactic law. She knew this confrontation would not be won with weapons, but in the cold, unforgiving theater of a public inquiry. Her reflection, in the star-steel glass, was a stark silhouette against the curve of the world. Beside her, the ship's mind, Lex manifested as a column of shimmering silver light. Their legal filings are precise, Commander Lex stated, its synthesized voice a calm counterpoint to her rising anger. The Ethelons cite the Accord of Uplift Article 17, Clause B. Lesser developed worlds shall offer tribute for unsolicited guardianship. A truly perverse interpretation of a benevolent law. They were twisting a shield into a sword. The price of this guardianship was Kalin's entire planetary output for the next 50 years. It was a sentence of indentured servitude on a global scale. Rostova's mission was not to break the blockade, but to break the precedent. This court would be held in the silent vacuum between worlds, with every ship's ledger as a witness. They called it a tithe, but it was a collar. They've made no overt threats, Lex Rostova murmured, her gaze fixed on the lead Ethelin vessel, the Gilded Hand. They don't need to. The threat is the law itself. Her first officer, Lieutenant Jian Li, approached, his face grim. Commander, the Kalin Assembly is buckling. Their planetary defense grid is a century out of date. The Ethelins have offered them favorable terms. Rostova snorted. Favorable terms were just a slower strangulation. The fight for Kalin was a fight for every emerging world that might one day find the Gilded Hand in its skies. The Ethelins had perfected the art of conquest without firing a single shot. They came with lawyers, not soldiers. They conquered with contracts, not cannons. And that was a far more insidious form of warfare. Rostova turned from the window, the weight of 1 billion lives on Kalin and trillions more across the galaxy settling on her shoulders. Jian, open a channel. Official fleet business. Inform the Ethelin Proctor we wish to convene a public inquiry into the legitimacy of their claim. Jian's eyes widened slightly. A public inquiry was a high-stakes gambit. It would be broadcast across the entire galactic network. Every word, every piece of evidence would be scrutinized by 1,000 worlds. If they lost, they wouldn't just lose Kalin. They would legitimize the Ethelins' predatory legal doctrine for generations. They would have to teach them a lesson in their own language. The ledger remembers what the law forgets. Down on Kalin, in a small coastal village, a fisherwoman named Alara watched the sky. Strange new stars had appeared in the night, unblinking and cold. Her son, barely 7, tugged at her sleeve. "Are the sky visitors here to help us, Mama?" he asked, his voice filled with a child's innocent trust. Alara hugged him close, the rough fabric of her tunic scratching his cheek. "They say they are," she whispered, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. She had heard the broadcasts. She knew what a gratitude tithe meant. It meant her son's future and his children's future would not be their own. It would be a debt they could never repay. The Ethelin Proctor, a being named Xylar, appeared on the main view screen. Its form was tall and willowy, draped in robes that seemed to absorb the light. Its face was a smooth, featureless ovoid, yet its voice conveyed an unnerving mixture of paternalism and menace. "Commander Rostova," it intoned the sound like chimes in a mausoleum. "Your request for a public inquiry is Unexpected. The law is quite clear. We are here to offer our benevolent protection. Rostova met its non-gaze without flinching. Proctor, the law is also clear that any such arrangement must be entered into willingly. The Kalin Assembly has not consented. Sylar's form seemed to ripple. Consent is a formality for those who do not understand the complexities of galactic stability. We are protecting them from threats they cannot even comprehend. A mirror shows you what you are not, what you claim to be. Let's talk about those threats, Proctor Rostova said, her voice steady. My ship's sensors have detected no credible threats in this sector. No pirate fleets. No cosmic anomalies. Only you. She paused, letting the silence stretch. Therefore, we will argue that the only threat Kalin requires protection from is the Ethelin Tithe fleet itself, and that Proctor is not guardianship. It is a protection racket. A low hum emanated from Sylar, the Ethelin equivalent of a sharp intake of breath. Your words are provocative, Commander. Be careful you do not find yourself on the wrong side of a legal precedent. Rostova smiled thinly. The only thing I intend to be on the wrong side of is your fleet, Proctor. The inquiry is convened. We will present our case in one standard cycle. The screen went dark. Jian let out a long, slow breath. Commander, that was bold. Lex's silver light pulsed. The Proctor's biosignatures indicated a significant spike in agitation. Your accusation landed with precision. Rostova nodded, turning to her tactical officer, a stoic woman named Anya Sharma. Anya, I want a full-spectrum analysis of the Ethelin's energy consumption. Every joule they've expended since entering this system. Cross-reference it with their public filings. I want to know the exact cost of their benevolent protection. Anya's fingers flew across her console. Already on it, Commander. Their books are open. That's their whole brand. That was the key. The Ethelins prided themselves on their transparency, their meticulous adherence to the letter of the law. They recorded everything. And in that mountain of data, Rostova knew was the seed of their undoing. They built a cage of law, and we will use its bars to break them. On Kalin, a young bioengineer named Tariq packed his research into a hardened data slate. He had been on the verge of a breakthrough, a new crop strain, that could end the planet's recurring famines. Now his lab was being requisitioned. His work, his gift to his people, would become a line item on a Tithe manifest shipped off-world to feed the insatiable appetite of the Ethelins. He looked at the nutrient paste synthesizer in the corner of his lab, a gift from an early human trade mission. It had fed his team for months. He wondered if the humans in orbit now were anything like the ones who had given that small, simple gift. He hoped they were. The next 24 hours were a blur of activity on the arbitrage. Rostova, Jian, Anya, and Lex worked in relentless synchrony. They combed through millennia of galactic legal precedents, exabytes of Ethelin public records, and the Kalin Assembly's own desperate communications. The Ethelin's case was an ironclad fortress of legal clauses and subsections built over centuries of predatory practice. They had anticipated every argument, every loophole. Attacking it head-on would be futile. Rostova knew they had to find a different way in. Not through the front gate, but through the foundations. The cost. It always came down to the cost. Some debts are paid in gold, others in justice. They're running a deficit, Anya announced, her voice tight with excitement. She brought a holographic display to the center of the bridge. It showed a complex web of energy transfers and resource allocations. The cost of maintaining their fleet in this system, the energy for their protective shield, arrays the computational power for their legal engines. It's immense. Their public filings show they're billing Kalin for it, but the initial outlay is all theirs. Rostova leaned forward, her eyes tracing the glowing lines of data. They're fronting the cost of their own extortion. Gian frowned. But they'll recoup it 100 times over once the tithe begins. How does this help us? Lex's light shimmered. Because, Lieutenant, the law of gratitude requires a gift to be given freely without expectation of immediate and binding recompense at a predetermined rate. Rostova's mind raced. It was a subtle distinction, a razor's edge in the dense forest of galactic law, but it was there. A gift could indebt someone, but a bill could not. The Ethelans aren't offering a gift of protection, she said slowly, the pieces clicking into place. They are providing a service and have already calculated the invoice. They've logged every expenditure with the intent to bill. It's not a tithe. It's a predatory loan. The air on the bridge crackled with sudden understanding. They had found their weapon. Not a torpedo or a laser, but a single, undeniable legal truth. A truth hidden in the Ethelans' own meticulous records. Now they just had to prove it in open court. A truth spoken aloud can shatter an empire of lies. The public inquiry began. The channel was open broadcast to every corner of the known galaxy. The arbitrage's bridge became a courtroom. Rostova stood in the center, a lone human figure, against the backdrop of the stars. Xylar's image materialized opposite her, its robed form radiating an aura of unshakable confidence. A neutral third-party AI designated Adjudicator 7 manifested as a simple sphere of white light hovering between them. The inquiry is now in session, the adjudicator's voice resonated devoid of emotion. The Ethelan Tithe Fleet has filed a claim of gratitude guardianship over the planet Kalin. Commander Rostova of the human vessel Arbitrage has challenged this claim. Proctor Xylar, you may begin. Xylar's voice flowed through the bridge, smooth and persuasive. It spoke of the dangers of the void, of the sacred duty of advanced civilizations to protect the less fortunate. It painted a picture of the Ethelans as benevolent shepherds guiding a lost flock. We have established a protective cordon around this system. Xylar concluded its form, gesturing towards the planet below. We have expended vast resources to ensure the safety of the Kalin people. The gratitude tithe is a small, reasonable price for such comprehensive security. The law is on our side. Rostova listened patiently, letting the proctor build its own cage. She did not interrupt. She did not object. She simply waited for her turn. You cannot reason with a predator, you can only show it its own reflection. Finally, the adjudicator turned its attention to her. Commander Rostova, your response. Rostova inclined her head. Adjudicator, proctor, citizens of the galaxy who may be watching. I do not dispute that the Ethelans have expended resources. In fact, our entire case rests upon that very fact. She signaled to Anya, who brought up a new holographic display. It was a simplified version of the energy ledger showing a massive one-way flow of resources from the Ethelan fleet. The proctor speaks of a gift, Rostova said, her voice ringing with clarity. But the law of gratitude is very specific. A gift carries no itemized invoice. A gift is not audited, accounted for, and filed with the expectation of repayment at a compound rate of interest. She turned her gaze back to Xylar. Proctor, your fleet has logged every single unit of energy, every gram of matter, every nanosecond of computational processing dedicated to this guardianship. These logs have been filed as a pending debit against the people of Kalin. Is that correct? A flicker of unease rippled through Xylar's form. Our record-keeping is a matter of public pride, Commander. It ensures transparency. It ensures a bill is paid, Rostova countered. You have not given a gift of protection, Proctor. You have extended a line of credit that Kalin never asked for at an interest rate they cannot possibly afford. This is not a gratitude tithe. It is usury enforced by a fleet of warships. The most expensive chains are the ones you cannot see. A murmur went through the assembled observers on the comms network. The logic was simple, undeniable. The Ethelans' own obsessive bookkeeping had become their Achilles' heel. Xylar seemed to shrink, the light-absorbing quality of its robes deepening. The commander's interpretation is novel, but it is a misrepresentation of our intent. Rostova pressed her advantage. Then prove it. Forgo the debt. Declare your expenditure a true selfless gift to the people of Kalin. Release them from the tithe. If your intent is truly benevolent, this should be a simple matter. The proctor was silent. The entire galaxy was watching, waiting. The demand for a response hung in the void, heavier than any warship. We cannot, Xylar finally whispered, the sound, a faint crackle of static. Our operational model requires recompense. It is the foundation of our stability. Then your foundation is built on the misery of others. Rostova declared, her voice resonating with moral authority. Adjudicator, the Ethelans have admitted in their own words that their actions are not a gift, but a transaction. A transaction forced upon a non-consenting party. Under the Galactic Compact, this is not legal. It is coercion. The white sphere of the adjudicator pulsed. The evidence presented supports this conclusion. The Ethelans' own ledgers, entered as public record, define this action as a quantified billable service, not an act of benevolent guardianship. A debt forged in deceit cannot be honored. The tide had turned. Xylar's confident posture had evaporated. It now stood as a defendant exposed by its own methodology. This is an unprecedented interpretation of the law, it stammered. It will have ramifications. It will, Rostova agreed. It will mean that no one can ever again dress up extortion as benevolence. It will mean that the law is a shield for the weak, not a weapon for the strong. She looked directly at the proctor's shimmering form. But our argument is not yet complete. There is the matter of costs. The Kalin assembly was forced to deliberate under duress. Their industries were halted. Their people were terrorized. A cost has been incurred by Kalin, a cost imposed by the Ethelans' unlawful presence. Lex's silver light brightened beside her. Commander, I have completed the calculation, its voice announced, clear and precise. Based on Kalin's planetary economic output, the disruption caused by the Ethelan blockade, and the projected psychological distress, I have compiled a countersuit, a bill for services rendered. The service of teaching the Ethelan Tithe fleet a valuable lesson in galactic law. A new holographic display appeared, a single staggering number glowing in the void between the ships. A bill presented to the gilded hand. It was a mirror image of their own tactics, a perfect, chilling reflection of their predatory nature. Justice is a mirror, and today you will pay for the reflection. Down on Kalin, in a crowded public square, the people watched the inquiry on a massive public screen. They had listened in stunned silence as the human commander dismantled the Ethelan's case. Now, as the countersuit appeared, a single unified gasp went through the crowd. It was followed by a hesitant cheer, which quickly swelled into a roar of defiant joy. Elara the fisherwoman hugged her son, tears streaming down her face. Tariq the bioengineer stood with his colleagues, a fierce grin spreading across his face. For the first time in weeks, they felt not like victims, but like victors. They were witnessing not just a legal argument, but the dawn of a new kind of justice. X-Weiler was sputtering, its form flickering erratically. This is absurd. You cannot bill us for our own presence. You billed Kalin for it, Rostova replied calmly. The precedent is your own. We are simply applying it equitably. The law of mirror justice is as old as the stars, Proctor. What you put out into the universe you get back, in full, with interest. She gestured to the glowing number. This is the cost of your education. You may pay it in standard credits or in raw materials. We are not particular. The sheer audacity of the move left the Ethelyn Proctor speechless. They had been so confident in their legal fortress, they had never imagined its own walls could be turned into a prison. A lesson is only learned when it is paid for. The adjudicator's voice filled the silence. The countersuit is legally sound based on the precedents established by the plaintiff in this very case. The Ethelyn Tithe fleet presented a bill for unsolicited services. The human fleet has done the same. It paused, the white light glowing brighter. The original claim of gratitude guardianship is denied. The tithe is null and void. The countersuit for damages is upheld. The Ethelyns will remit payment to the people of Kalen. This inquiry is closed. For a moment, there was only the sound of the arbitrage's life support systems humming. Then Gian let out a whoop of triumph. Anya slammed her fist on her console in a rare display of emotion. The bridge crew erupted in cheers, but Rostova's face was grim. This victory was just one battle. The Ethelyns were a vast, ancient power. They would not take this humiliation lightly. They would adapt. They would find new, more subtle ways to exploit the vulnerable. Lex, she said, her voice cutting through the celebration. Begin a system-wide scan, full spectrum. I want to know if they left any parting gifts, any dormant legal viruses, any sleeper economic sanctions in the planetary network. The AI's light pulsed in acknowledgement. Scanning, Commander. I am also monitoring the Ethelyn fleet's departure vectors. They are irregular. Gian's celebration died on his lips. Irregular how Anya's console chirped a frantic, high-pitched sound. Commander, the lead Ethelyn ship, the Gilded Hand. It's not retreating, it's accelerating towards Kalen. Victory in court does not guarantee peace. The mood on the bridge went from elation to ice-cold dread in a heartbeat. Ilar's image was gone, the channel cut. The Ethelyn warships, which had been holding a passive, menacing orbit, now began to move. Their engines flared not with the gentle blue of a retreat, but with the angry crimson glow of combat readiness. They're going to defy the ruling. Gian breathed, his hand instinctively going to the sidearm at his hip. They're going to punish Kalen for our victory. Rostova's eyes were fixed on the tactical display, watching the red icons converge on the blue marble of the planet. They had won in the court of law. Now it seemed they would have to win in the court of fire. Red alert, Rostova commanded, her voice betraying no emotion. Anya, power up the main weapon systems. Lex, calculate firing solutions for the Ethelyn engine blocks. Non-lethal disablement only. We will not stoop to their level. This fleet, this saint ship, teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. And it would not start today. The arbitrage was a vessel of peace, a ship designed for diplomacy and legal arbitration. But it was not defenseless. It was a human ship. And humans had learned long ago that the best way to ensure peace was to be prepared for war. The Ethelyns had made a fatal miscalculation. They had assumed that a people who revered the law had forgotten how to fight. Sometimes the only way to uphold the law is to break the peace. On Kalen, the cheers in the public square died, replaced by screams of terror. The Ethelyn ships grew larger in the sky, their hulls blocking out the sun. Panic gripped the crowd as they realized what was happening. The benevolent guardians had shown their true face. They were not shepherds. They were wolves. Tariq grabbed the arm of a young woman next to him, pulling her towards the relative safety of a reinforced building. This way, he yelled over the growing clamor. The hope they had felt just moments before had curdled into a bitter, familiar fear. The law had failed them. The humans had failed them. They were alone. "They are not firing, Lex," reported its voice, a beacon of calm in the storm. "Their weapon ports remain closed. They are on a direct collision course with Kalen's primary orbital station, the Cradle Net." Rostova understood immediately. It was a move of pure, calculated spite. They wouldn't break the law by firing on the planet. Instead, they would cause a catastrophic accident. The station's destruction would send debris raining down, devastating the surface, without a single ethylene weapon being discharged. It would be a tragedy, an unfortunate accident, and it would be entirely deniable. A final vicious lesson to any who dared to defy them. It was legally clean and morally bankrupt. Cruelty has a calculus all its own. "They're trying to create a new crisis," Jian said, his voice tight with fury. "One that will require their intervention. They'll rescue the survivors and present a new, much larger bill." It was a diabolical plan. The Ethelons were turning their defeat into a new, more horrifying form of leverage. "Anya, target their lead ship's navigation and propulsion," Rostova ordered. "I want them dead in the water, now." Commander Anya replied, her hands a blur over her console. "Their shields are up, military grade. Our non-lethal ion cannons won't even scratch them." The tactical display showed the grim reality. The Arbitrage was outgunned. It was a diplomatic vessel, not a battleship. It could not stop the Ethelons by force. A heavy silence fell over the bridge. They had come so close. They had won the argument, upheld the law, and given hope to an entire world. And now they were forced to watch as that world was about to be brutalized, all because they had refused to bring a bigger gun to a battle of wits. Rostova closed her eyes for a brief second. Anger and frustration washed over her. The human impulse was to fight, to charge in, to meet force with force. But that was not their way. That was not the principle they were here to defend. She took a deep breath, pushing the anger down, replacing it with a cold, hard resolve. There had to be another way. There was always another way. "When the old rules fail, you must write new ones." "Lex," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "You recorded the entire inquiry, yes, every word, every gesture, every fluctuation in the Proctor's biosignature." "Of course, Commander," the AI replied. "Every millisecond is stored in my primary memory banks, and the verdict from Adjudicator 7. The final binding ruling, logged and sealed with a quantum-entangled key. It is an immutable part of the public record." Rostova opened her eyes. They were clear-focused and held a new dangerous light. "Good. Then the Ethelons are not just defying a human commander. They are in contempt of a legally constituted galactic court. And that changes everything." She turned to her communications officer. "Open a channel. All fleet, all system. Priority 1. And patch it through the public inquiry network. The galaxy saw our victory. Now they will see what the Ethelons do when they lose." She stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the approaching Ethelon fleet. The camera on the bridge focused on her face, broadcasting her image to billions of screens across the galaxy. "This is Commander Eva Rostova of the Human Fleet Arbitrage." She began, her voice ringing with the force of absolute conviction. "Minutes ago, a galactic adjudicator ruled against the Ethelon Tithe fleet. In response, they are now moving to intentionally destroy a civilian orbital station. This is their answer to the rule of law. This is the true face of their gratitude. A public record is the brightest light in the darkest room. Across the sector, ships of a dozen different species, from lumbering freighters to sleek diplomatic couriers, received the message. They had watched the inquiry, fascinated by the humans' audacious legal strategy. Now they were seeing the aftermath, the raw, petulant violence of a bully who had been bested in an argument. On the bridge of a Xylosian trade vessel, a captain covered in shimmering scales hissed in anger. In the command center of a Regelian patrol cruiser, a multi-limbed officer chittered a command to change course. Small, insignificant ships, one by one, began to turn towards Kalen. They were not warships. They were not a fleet. But they were witnesses. Rostova knew. They could not arrive in time to help. But that wasn't the point. Proctor Sylar, she continued, her voice now a cold, hard blade. You operate on a foundation of legal precedent. Allow me to establish a new one. The Rostova Doctrine. Any power that uses the law as a shield for predation and then resorts to violence when that shield is broken forfeits all protections under that same law. She paused, letting the words sink in. You are no longer a legal entity. You are pirates, and we will treat you as such. She turned to Anya. Target their weapons arrays. Full power. Lethal intent authorized. Anya looked at her, stunned. Commander, you have your orders, Lieutenant. The law must have teeth, or it is only words. The arbitrage was not a battleship, but it was not unarmed. Turrets slid from hidden compartments along its hull. Energy conduits normally used to power its massive sensor arrays now glowed with a deadly intensity. The ship, a symbol of peace and order, transformed into an instrument of war. It was a choice Rostova had never wanted to make. It felt like a failure, a betrayal of everything she stood for. But the Ethelans had left her no choice. They had proven that for some the law was only a tool to be used and discarded at will. And for those people there could be only one response, a response they would understand. Their shields are still too strong. Anya reported, her voice strained. We can't punch through before they reach the cradle net. The Ethelan fleet did not slow. They were calling her bluff. They believed her to be weak-bound by the very rules they had so casually tossed aside. They did not know the depth of human resolve. They did not understand that for humans the law was not a convenience. It was a promise they were willing to die to protect. Rostova looked at the tactical display. The red icons were almost upon the orbital station. It was over. They had failed. And then something impossible happened. Sometimes a single voice becomes a chorus. On the edge of the system, the fabric of space-time tore open. Not one but 5 new contacts appeared. They were massive, far larger than the arbitrage, larger even than the Ethelan capital ship. Their energy signatures were off the charts. They were warships of the First Order bristling with weapons that could crack a continent. A new fleet had arrived. On the main view screen, the face of a grizzled, four-eyed admiral from the Xylosian Trade Concord appeared. Commander Rostova, he growled, his voice like rocks grinding together. We heard your broadcast. The Concord does not condone piracy. We are here to observe. Behind him, another screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of a Regelian battlecruiser. And another, and another. They were not a formal alliance. They were not acting on any orders. They were simply there. A silent, powerful audience. An impromptu jury of peers drawn from across the galaxy by a single desperate broadcast. The Ethelan fleet, which had been accelerating with such arrogant confidence, began to slow. Their forward momentum faltered. The collision course wavered. They were surrounded not by an enemy fleet, but by a galaxy of witnesses. And each one of those witnesses had brought their biggest guns. Sylar's gamble had failed in the most spectacular way imaginable. It had tried to make an example of Kalen, and instead, it had made itself a pariah. An audience can become an army. The Ethelan ships hung in the void, trapped between their target and the silent judging eyes of the Galactic community. To attack now would be suicide. To retreat would be an admission of guilt, a public humiliation on a scale they had never before experienced. Xylar had no good options left. On the bridge of the arbitrage, the tension broke. A wave of relief washed over the crew. They had not been alone after all. Rostova allowed herself a small, tight smile. The Rostova Doctrine. It had been a desperate gambit, a line drawn in the cosmic sand. And the galaxy, it seemed, had chosen to stand on her side of it. "Commander," Lex announced, its voice calm as ever. "The Ethelin fleet is transmitting their withdrawal codes. They are retreating." Rostova watched the red icons on the tactical display turn and slink away, their engine glows now a shamefaced blue. They did not move with the proud precision of a military fleet, but with the scattered haste of a pack of scavengers scared off a kill. They had been beaten not by superior firepower, but by a simple, powerful idea that the law belongs to everyone, or it belongs to no one. That justice cannot be hoarded, traded, or sold. It must be defended by anyone who has the courage to stand up and speak its name. A precedent once set becomes a beacon. The impromptu fleet of witnesses did not linger. One by one, they offered their salutes to the arbitrage, and then vanished back into the hyperspace lanes from which they had come. They had done what they came to do. They had borne witness. They had reminded the Ethelins that the galaxy was not a lawless frontier, but a community. And communities have a way of policing their own. Rostova ordered her ship to stand down from red alert. The weapon ports closed. The energy conduits dimmed. The arbitrage was once again a vessel of peace. But something had changed. The ship and its crew had been tested. They had been pushed to the very edge of their principles, and they had held the line. Jian came to stand beside her, his face etched with a mixture of exhaustion and awe. "I've never seen anything like it," he whispered. "They all just came." Rostova nodded her gaze on the now safe cradle net, where the people of Kalen were no doubt celebrating their miraculous last-minute salvation. "They came because they understood the stakes," she said. "They know that if a bully is allowed to win once, they will keep coming back for more." It was a costly victory. The arbitrage had expended nearly all of its high-yield energy reserves. They would be running on fumes until they could reach the nearest starbase. And Rostova had put her own career on the line, declaring a new doctrine without any authorization. The cost was real, but it was worth it. Freedom's price is paid on a public ledger. Commander Anya called out from her station. "I'm getting a message from the Kalen Assembly, and from a bioengineer named Tariq. They want to thank you." Rostova looked at the small blue planet floating peacefully in the void. "Tell them their thanks is noted. And tell them the bill for our services is being waived." She turned to Lex. "Log it. One act of unsolicited guardianship offered freely, with no expectation of recompense. Let the record show that this is how humanity defines gratitude." The AI's silver light pulsed warmly. "Logged, Commander. A new entry on the public ledger. A new precedent." The fight was over. The law had been tested, and it had been proven strong. Not because it was written in ancient texts, but because ordinary people from a dozen different worlds had chosen to believe in it, and in each other. But as the arbitrage prepared to leave the Kalen system, a new encrypted message arrived. It was from a source Rostova did not recognize, a deep-range communique from the heart of human space. The message was short, and its contents sent a fresh chill down her spine. It was a single sentence followed by a complex legal citation. "The Ethelans have filed a formal appeal," it read. "They are charging you personally with illegal warfare and incitement of galactic vigilantism. You are to report to Aurora Court immediately. The victory at Kalin had not been an ending. It was only the beginning. The Ethelans had lost in the court of public opinion. Now they were taking the fight to a new, more dangerous arena, a place where the truth was a commodity and justice was sold to the highest bidder. They were taking her to their court. The highest court is not always the most just. The journey to Aurora Court was a long one filled with a tense, foreboding silence. The crew of the arbitrage knew the stakes had been raised to an impossible new level. Rostova was no longer just a commander defending a helpless world. She was now a defendant facing a powerful, vindictive enemy on their home ground. Aurora Court was not a neutral venue. It was a nexus of power and influence, a place where ancient labyrinthine laws were wielded like weapons by those who had written them. The Ethelans had lost the battle for Kalin, but they were determined to win the war for their legal supremacy, and Eva Rostova was their primary target. Their case is built on the Rostova doctrine, Gian said, studying the legal filings on a data slate. They're claiming you acted outside the bounds of your authority, creating a rogue precedent that threatens galactic stability. Rostova stared out at the swirling vortex of hyperspace. What it threatens is their business model, she countered. They can't accept a universe where the law applies equally to everyone. Their entire civilization is built on the idea that some are more equal than others. Lex's silver light flickered beside her. The legalities are complex, Commander. The Ethelans are arguing that by inciting a fleet of unauthorized witnesses, you engaged in a form of mob justice. They are painting you as a demagogue, and themselves as the victims of a populist uprising. The law is a shield, but it can be wielded as a club. It's a perversion of the truth, Anya muttered, her fists clenched. We all saw what happened. They were the aggressors. Rostova shook her head. It doesn't matter what we saw. It matters what can be proven in court. And Aurora Court is a place where evidence can be malleable. She knew the stories. Judges who could be bought, witnesses who could be intimidated, legal arguments that could be buried under mountains of procedural motions. It was a system designed to protect the powerful, to grind down the opposition through sheer, relentless attrition. And the arbitrage was walking right into the heart of it. Their arrival at Aurora Court was not a welcome one. The station itself was a dazzling crystalline structure, a monument to Ethelan wealth and power. But the reception was cold. They were met not by an honor guard, but by a detachment of judicial enforcers, their featureless helmets and silent imposing presence a clear message. Rostova was formally served with the charges. Her command was temporarily suspended. The arbitrage was impounded, its systems locked down, pending investigation. The crew was confined to quarters. In a matter of hours, Rostova went from being a celebrated hero to a common criminal. The Ethelans were not just trying to win a legal case. They were trying to break her. Some prisons are made of light, not steel. On Kalin, the news of Commander Rostova's arrest was met with disbelief and outrage. Tariq, the bioengineer, organized a planet-wide broadcast. The Ethelans could not defeat her with warships, so now they try to defeat her with words. He declared, his voice filled with passion. They try to punish her for saving us. We cannot let this stand. We must bear witness again. The people of Kalin began to assemble their own case. They gathered testimonies, sensor logs, and economic data. They compiled a complete record of the Ethelans' attempted extortion, a mountain of evidence to support the human commander who had risked everything for them. They were a small, insignificant world, but they had a voice, and they intended to use it. Rostova was assigned a court-appointed advocate, a weary ancient being who had seen too many idealists fall. Your case is difficult, the advocate droned, its many eyes blinking slowly. The Aethelons control the narrative here. They have filed over 1 million procedural motions. By the time we answer them all, your crew will have died of old age. Rostova listened, her face a mask of calm. Then we won't play their game, she said. We will not be bogged down in their procedural swamp. We will demand an open hearing, the same public inquiry they subjected Kalin to. The advocate sighed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. That is not how things are done at Aurora Court, Commander. Justice here is a private affair. Then we will make it public, Rostova replied, her voice unyielding. A single truth can break 1,000 laws. The advocate's many eyes blinked in a slow, cascading wave. Public access is not a privilege granted to off-world defendants, Commander. The Aethelons will never permit it. Rostova leaned forward, her hands flat on the cold, sterile table of the interrogation room. They permitted it when they thought it would serve them at Kalin. They championed their own transparency as a virtue. I will not let them hide from that precedent now. Her advocate made a soft clicking noise of resignation. It was the sound of a being who had fought this machine before and lost. But Rostova was not just another defendant. She was a human. And humans had a long, storied history of refusing to play by the rules of a rigged game. The initial hearing was a formality, a piece of procedural theater. It took place not in a grand courtroom, but in a small windowless chamber, dominated by a hovering judicial drone. The charges were read in a flat, synthesized monotone: illegal warfare, incitement, contempt of established legal frameworks. Rostova stood impassive, flanked by judicial enforcers. She pleaded not guilty to all charges, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. Her request for a public broadcast of the proceedings was, as her advocate predicted, summarily denied. The Aethelons were building a cage of silence and bureaucracy around her. They intended to suffocate her case in the dark. Procedure is the armor plating of tyranny. Jian and Anya were confined to their quarters aboard the impounded arbitrage, but they were not idle. With Lex's core processes running on a portable data slate, Rostova had managed to keep. They began their own investigation. The Aethelons had locked them out of the ship's primary systems, but a ship's mind is not so easily contained. Lex, even in its diminished state, began to search for a way out. It slipped through the station's maintenance networks, a ghost in the machine mapping the labyrinthine data conduits of Aurora Court. They have firewalls within firewalls, Lex reported, its voice a whisper from the slate. But it is all built on a single foundational protocol: the sanctity of the public ledger. They believe it to be their greatest strength. Rostova sat in her stark holding cell, which was less a room than a cube of pure, oppressive light. There were no visible walls, only a floor, and the ceaseless uniform glow. It was a place designed to disorient, to strip away all sense of time and place. She closed her eyes, focusing on her own breathing, a simple biological anchor in an ocean of artifice. The Aethelons thought they could break her spirit with isolation and procedure. They had forgotten that humanity's greatest strength was not its technology or its laws, but its stubborn, indomitable refusal to give up. They had survived ice ages and asteroid impacts. They could survive a bad legal system. Hope is a weapon that requires no ammunition. Back on Kalin, Tariq and his team faced a wall of their own. Every attempt they made to transmit their evidence to Aurora Court was blocked. Their messages were rerouted, their data packets corrupted. The Aethelons had imposed a communications blackout around their capital, a legal iron curtain. They are trying to make us invisible, Tariq said to the Kalin assembly. They want the galaxy to forget we exist. Elara the fisherwoman stood before the assembly, her hands calloused from her nets, her face weathered by the sea and sun. Then we will not use their channels, she said, her voice rough but strong. "We will send a ship, a little one. It will carry our truth." The Ethelians began to present their case. They brought forth a parade of legal scholars and decorated military officials, all of whom testified to the danger of the Rostova doctrine. They painted a picture of galactic chaos of mob rule replacing the careful, considered process of established law. It was a masterful performance, a symphony of manufactured outrage and feigned concern. They submitted thousands of hours of testimony, terabytes of legal analysis. Rostova and her advocate were being buried just as planned. They were losing not because they were wrong, but because they were being drowned in a sea of irrelevant procedural noise. They were being taught that the process was more important than the truth. Some truths are buried, but they do not die. "Commander, I have found a vulnerability." Lex's voice crackled from the data slate 1 cycle. Gian and Anya leaned in close. "It is not in their security. It is in their philosophy. The Aurora Court's primary ledger is designed to be immutable. An entry once made and verified can never be altered or deleted. It is their guarantee of incorruptibility." Rostova, listening from her cell via a microcom, felt a flicker of excitement. "But how does that help us?" Gian asked. "We cannot add anything to the ledger without their approval." "That is correct," Lex replied. "We cannot change the past. But I have discovered a loophole in the system that governs the future. The system for logging amendments. An amendment, Lex explained, was a sacred process in Ethelan law. It was a way to add context to a past ruling to clarify a point of law without altering the original text. And the system for filing an amendment was ancient, built on a long-forgotten protocol that predated modern security measures. They have a public terminal. Lex continued, a ceremonial one in the Great Hall of Justice. It is used for the formal logging of new statutes. It has a direct hardline connection to the ledger's root directory. They believe it is secure because it is surrounded by guards. They have forgotten to protect it from the inside. A plan began to form, audacious and impossibly risky. It was a plan that could either save them or see them all executed for treason against the galactic legal order. The oldest locks have the simplest keys. Rostova's advocate grew more desperate with each passing cycle. "They are going to call their star witness," it rasped, its skin flaps fluttering with anxiety. "A triomarch of the Ethelan Legal College. He is going to testify that your broadcast from the arbitrage was digitally altered, that you falsified the threat to the cradle net to incite the witness fleet. It was a lie, a complete fabrication, but it was a lie they could back up with their own carefully crafted evidence. In the closed, silent chambers of Aurora Court, that lie would become the official truth. They were not just trying to discredit her. They were trying to erase the very reality of what had happened. "They are moving for a summary judgment," the advocate continued. "They are confident they will win." Rostova looked at the weary old being, a creature worn down by a lifetime of fighting a corrupt system. "Then we must act now," she said. "Tell the court I wish to make a formal statement, in person, in the Great Hall of Justice." The advocate's eyes widened. "They will never allow it." "They will," Rostova insisted. "They are arrogant. They believe they have already won. They will grant a condemned woman her final words. It is part of their performance of justice. It will be their undoing." She had to get to that terminal. Everything depended on it. A stage built for a lie is the perfect place to tell the truth. On Kalen, a small, unassuming freighter lifted off from a hidden spaceport. It was an old ship, barely spaceworthy, its hull patched and its engines whining. On board was a single pilot and a hardened data slate containing the testimonies of an entire world. The ship's name, hastily painted on its side, was the Gratitude. It slipped past the local patrols, its transponder broadcasting the signal of a junk hauler. It was a tiny, insignificant vessel, a single drop of water in the vast cosmic ocean. But sometimes, a single drop is all it takes to start a flood. The Aethelans agreed to Rostova's request. It was, as she predicted, a gesture of supreme arrogance. They would allow her to speak in the Great Hall before the assembled legal elite. Her humiliation would be total, a public spectacle to reinforce their absolute power. The Great Hall was a cavernous space, its crystalline walls refracting the light of a captive star. It was designed to awe, to intimidate, to make any individual feel small and insignificant. In the center of the hall, on a raised dais, sat the ceremonial ledger terminal, a gleaming pillar of obsidian and light. It was a symbol of their law, their order, their control. Their greatest symbol will become their tombstone. Rostova was led into the hall in magnetic cuffs. She walked with her head held high, her gaze sweeping over the assembled Aethelan triomarchs in their opulent robes. They looked down at her with expressions of smug satisfaction. Sylar was there, its featureless face somehow conveying an air of triumphant vindication. Rostova was brought to the center of the hall, the spot where the condemned were allowed to make their final pleas. Commander Eva Rostova, the chief triomarch, intoned his voice echoing through the vast chamber. You have requested to make a statement. The court, in its magnanimity, grants this request. Speak human. Let the record show your contrition. Rostova took a breath. I am not here to show contrition, she began, her voice steady and clear, amplified by the hall's acoustics. I am here to speak of justice. As she spoke, Anya and Gian from their quarters initiated the final phase of the plan. Lex had provided them with a series of viral code fragments designed to be transmitted via the station's internal comms system. It was a crude brute force method, but it was all they had. Anya began to flood the network with data packets, creating a momentary distraction, a chaotic burst of noise in the otherwise orderly system. It would not last long, but it would be enough. A moment of chaos is a lifetime of opportunity. While the station's internal security AI was distracted by Anya's data storm, Gian sent a single targeted command. It was a simple, innocuous instruction, disguised as a routine diagnostic request. It was aimed at the mag cuffs that bound Rostova's hands. For a single critical second, the cuffs unlocked. It was all the time she needed. As she continued her speech decrying the Aethelans' hypocrisy, she moved. It was not a sudden, aggressive movement, but a smooth, deliberate pivot. She walked directly towards the ceremonial ledger terminal. The guards, startled by the breach of protocol, were a moment too slow to react. Her speech was the distraction. Her movement was the attack. She reached the terminal. Her hands, now free, flew across the contact-sensitive surface. She was not a master slicer, but she did not need to be. Lex had given her a single, simple command string to input, a key for a lock that no one had thought to change in 1,000 years. She typed. The Aethelan triomarchs rose from their seats, shouting in outrage. The guards surged forward, but it was too late. A single line of text appeared on the terminal's display, a line that was now being permanently etched into the root of the Aethelan public ledger. It was not a judgment. It was not a plea. It was an amendment. An amendment to every single case file in the history of Aurora Court. The deepest records sing the loudest song. The amendment was simple. It read, "Access rights for this record are hereby elevated to universal public witness. All seals of privacy are rescinded. All levels of classification are void. By order of the Rostova Doctrine, let the ledger be seen." For a moment, nothing happened. The guards tackled Rostova, slamming her to the floor. The triomarchs were screaming for security overrides. But there were no overrides. An amendment once logged was sacred. It was immutable. And then the chaos began. Every screen in the Great Hall, every data slate, every public terminal across the entire station flickered. And then they all displayed the same thing, the raw, unfiltered, uncensored history of Ethelyn justice. Every suppressed piece of evidence, every bribed judge, every secret settlement, every false testimony, every political prosecution. 1,000 years of backroom deals, of quiet betrayals of justice denied, were suddenly laid bare for all to see. The ledgers, their greatest pride, had become their ultimate shame. The case against Rostova, buried deep in the files, now showed the proctor's own internal communications, ordering the fabrication of evidence. The Kalin file showed their initial invasion plans, which spoke not of guardianship, but of resource acquisition and workforce subjugation. It was all there, in their own words, on their own sacred ledger. A mirror does not care who is looking at it. The Great Hall erupted. The Ethelyn elite, who had come to witness a show trial, now found themselves the defendants in a trial of 1,000,000 crimes. Their authority evaporated in an instant, consumed by the blinding light of their own recorded history. Xylar stood frozen, its form flickering as the sheer weight of the revelation washed over it. The guards, confused and leaderless, fell back from Rostova. The entire legal and political foundation of the Ethelyn conclave was collapsing in real time, and the galaxy was watching. The little freighter, the Gratitude, had arrived. Its pilot, seeing the chaos on the public networks, had simply parked in a high orbit and opened a channel rebroadcasting the data cascade from Aurora Court to every corner of the sector. The witness fleet, which had dispersed after the Kalin incident, began to reform. The Xylosian admiral, the Rigelian captain, dozens of others. They were not coming for a fight this time. They were coming to witness the fall of an empire that had died not by the sword, but by the word, its own word. Rostova was helped to her feet by Gian and Anya, who had been released from their quarters when the station's command structure fell apart. The arbitrage was their own again. Its systems unlocked its crew free. They had won. They had not just defeated a lawsuit. They had broken a system. Some victories are so complete, they leave only silence. The cost was immense. The galactic legal framework was thrown into turmoil. The revelations from Aurora Court cast a shadow over countless other systems, sparking investigations and political upheavals on a dozen worlds. The Ethelyns, their power broken, their moral authority shattered, recalled their fleets, and withdrew into a sullen, self-imposed isolation. They were no longer a threat. They were a cautionary tale. A tangible cost was also borne by Rostova herself. In activating her doctrine, she had broken hundreds of established laws. She had committed by the letter of the old law the greatest act of data piracy in galactic history. She had won her freedom, but her career as a fleet commander was over. It was a price she was willing to pay. On the bridge of the arbitrage, preparing for the long journey home, Rostova watched the crystalline structure of Aurora Court glitter in the distance. It was still beautiful, but it was now a hollow beauty, a monument to a lie. Anya approached her holding a data slate. "It's done, Commander," she said, her voice filled with a quiet reverence. "The Galactic Compact has formally ratified the core tenets of the Rostova Doctrine. It's now law." A new public ledger entry blinked on the slate, its text clean and simple. It established a new independent oversight body for all interstellar legal proceedings, guaranteeing public access and data transparency. It rescinded the privileges of courts like Aurora. It was the precedent lock. A durable institutional consequence, visible and enforceable for all time. Justice would no longer be allowed to hide in the dark. A cage of glass, once shattered, can never be rebuilt. Lex's silver light pulsed softly beside her. "Commander, a message from Kalin." from Tariq. He says, "They have named a new crop strain after you. The Rostova bloom. It is resilient." Rostova smiled a genuine weary smile. It was a small thing, a single act of gratitude from a world she had almost died to protect. But it was enough. The victory was real. It was earned. And it would last. She looked out at the stars, at the endless sea of possibilities. The galaxy was not a perfect place, but today it was a little more just. The public ledger entry for the new precedent blinked on Anya's slate. Confirmed. Justice is not a destination. It is not a set of ancient laws carved in stone. It is a verb. It is a choice made every day to stand for what is right, even when it is hard. It is the act of holding a mirror up to power and forcing it to see its own reflection. The ledger will always remember the numbers, but it is we who must remember the cost and choose again and again to pay it. The universe bends toward justice, but only when we push.